Thanks so much for this opportunity. So I guess I'd like to start with working at the intersection of art, science, and technology. And my research focuses on the artistry of lens-based media technologies, ranging really from traditional to cutting-edge cameras to connect the public to underwater animals and environments. This is one of the most fashionable creatures, a flying fish, sort of a superhero-esque cape-like winged creature with accented silver and blue hues that inspire imagination. Throughout human history, nature and photography have been deeply intertwined. In 1861, Carlton Watkins photographed the rugged landscape of Yosemite Valley, which helped to initiate the field of conservation photography, as well as influence congressional leaders to implement the national park system. More recently and locally, Joel Sternfeld photographed the High Line, and those images were used to rally public support. One of the questions is, how can interaction with and participation in lens-based media technologies serve as a mechanism to increase understanding of the environment and to elicit a positive stewardship? This question has far-reaching practical consequences, as human societies rely more and more on visual media and visual language to communicate complex social and environmental issues impacting people and the planet. As part of my process, I focus on learning and pushing the boundaries of cutting-edge camera technologies. This is a behind-the-scenes view of an immersive multi-camera, semi-processed image within the hull of a shipwreck. That's me on the right. The images are then stitched, mapped into a public art experience, an immersive sort of theater in the round, or a virtual reality experience that gives a feeling of looking through portholes on a submarine. For those of you that like stories, this visual narrative was created to complement Ocean Stories for Story Collider. Our conceptual journey traveled from Brooklyn to the coastline and to the deep ocean. From indoor to outdoor projections, how can lens-based media create impact? This is an all too often an overlooked scene of an everyday river. It's also the story of one of the most remarkable animal migrations on the northeast coast, the river herring. You can't see it in this picture, but the river herring are teeming within this river. To illuminate the herring story, a story of overcoming the odds of urban dams, overfishing, and environmental change, I'm in the early phases of developing and testing lenses, projectors, reflective surfaces, materials, and paints to maximize visual impact. Conceptually, the video creates an emotional connection that reveals the balletic movement and opposing forces in nature, the movement of a school of fish swimming upstream and the water flowing rapidly downstream. The grandiose projection adds to the gravitas to amplify its impact. A still picture, a portrait of a 50-foot, 25-ton humpback whale breaching out of the water, captures our attention, allowing the viewer to gaze within the luxuriant detail of a whale and water droplets in midair before returning to the sea. Wildlife photography, like street photography, portrait photography, and documentary photography, often take hours, days, weeks, and years of patience, followed by seconds of action to create compelling visual narratives. One of the challenges is today in a modern world, we take photos for granted. We think we just pull the trigger, auto everything, and you get your shot. But this couldn't be further from the truth. My image, and that of other photographers, is captured with the intention that reveals the critical elements of movement, behavior, light, and composition to create a single frame that serves both as artistic expression and as an environmental story. I'm proud to say this image was selected for the cover of a coffee table book for the Smithsonian Press that was just released this October. And here are a few inside spreads of a lion's mane jelly with a juvenile haddock, with a juvenile pollock, bubble feeding. This is all off the coast of New England. My favorite shark, the blue shark with its puppy dog black eyes, and a microscopic view of algae and planktonic creatures. But in the era of COVID, it's a challenge to host an exhibit. And I've been researching virtual exhibitions as a way of adapting and connecting with audiences. In collaboration with ILCP, that's the International League of Conservation Photographers, an organization in which I hold a professional affiliation as a senior fellow, they launched this innovative virtual exhibit at Wildscreen 2020. The exhibit features environmental stories around the world. The exhibit begins with an overview of the imagery of the space. First encounter is with Steve Winter, the most famous big cat photographer. We go to the next photo. The ocean, to a gallery on oceans with Brian Scarry, a colleague and a friend, the preeminent underwater photographer. And then finally to an image of a rare portrait of the endangered Atlantic bluefin tuna. Last slide. From a virtual to physical exhibitions, photography transforms public space into works of art. This exhibit is a window into the underwater wildlife of New York, a project aimed at connecting the cityscape to the seascape. The work was selected by Photoville that displayed 60 photo projects throughout the 5 boroughs of New York. In conclusion, photography has the power to transform public perception that sparks imagination and inspires positive social change and environmental change. And through the FIT Innovation Center, I'm further working to incorporate students into research, to mentor and cultivate the next generation of image makers, storytellers, and future leaders. Thanks so much.
All right, thank you, Keith.
Yeah.
Thank you.
As we move into our Q&A, as Jackie mentioned, we're going to unmute everybody so that you can chime in with your questions and comments for Keith. So just give me 1 second here to unmute everybody. And you all have an unmute request. So when you are ready, just go ahead and unmute yourself with your question. Also, you may type it into the chat and we will make sure it gets read to Keith.
Okay, questions, please.
Oh, that's easy.
Okay, I'm checking the chat as well.
Keith, what's next?
I didn't even see who that was. Well,
it was Michael Ferraro.
Oh, Michael. Hey, Michael. I think I've been spending a lot of time in the early phases of testing and learning a lot of these technologies and cameras. And now one phase is, to think about how can interaction with animals and connecting to the local environment have a real meaningful impact. And so I'm beginning to collaborate more and more with an interdisciplinary approach to understand cognitive behavior of people, to understand how they think and relate to the environment, with architects and with scientists, to be able to make not just an exhibition that is art and conveying the imagery, but also conveying a larger sort of interdisciplinary approach of understanding human dynamics, social pressures, so that these projections and sort of transformative of a scene or a takeover of a city can really create a visual experience to connect people. And I think, especially on the northeast coast of the United States, where I think we're less familiar with our certainly the marine life, but less to the wildlife than we are in perhaps other parts of the world, i.e. California, Hawaii, and those types of places.
That's great, Keith. Thanks so much. One thing I was wondering is, what kind of, have you started to get your head around presentation formats? It's a little bit along the line of what I was asking Alexander. And in exploring how to reach communities, new engagement and new presentation formats might be interesting, at least in terms of understanding how you can immerse people in the mindset and in the story that you want to tell.
I think that's a wonderful question and comment. And I think there's a lot, and actually working with some museums now on sort of exploring that, because one aspect is, how do you get people to a place to physically go there to experience it? But that only captures a small percentage of the people who actually go to those kind of places. The second is, how do you branch off to other communities or locations where they're less familiar or don't have access to as much? And what does it mean to immerse someone in art, in imagery, and in the environment? And so I think I am looking at a lot of that intersection to understand, specifically actually in the role of museums, what is the role of a museum, and how can you break off of that to engage communities that don't typically go to those, which are many, quite honestly, and to expand their reach. So that's a really fun area to begin to think about. And all these technologies are really lending themselves they're in the early phases of how do we actually connect over. And so thanks. Yeah, that's an area
And immersion has often been cited as being something that's psychological, not physical. So understanding how to have people absorbed in the story and become present in the experience is really one of the exciting challenges.
Yeah, exactly.